The fluorescent lights buzz overhead like trapped insects. Seattle General's pediatrics wing smells like antiseptic and something underneath, something warm that might be hope, or might just be heating oil. Laura Bennett moves through the 6th floor corridor at 6:03 a.m., her badge clipped to a lanyard that swings with practiced precision. She's been a nurse for 18 years. No one here knows she spent 12 of them in a combat surgeon's field tent. She adjusts her posture as she walks. The limp is small, barely noticeable if you're not looking for it. Most people aren't looking. Most people see the name tag and the scrubs and a woman who belongs in a hospital the way walls belong in buildings, necessary, unobtrusive, part of the infrastructure. What they don't see is the way her fingers move when she inserts a difficult four. Like someone who has threaded needles while a Humvee bounced over terrain that wanted to kill her. Like someone whose hands remember things her personnel file never will. The break room is half full. 2 night shift nurses finishing coffee. A resident scrolling his phone, eyes heavy. Laura moves past them without greeting. She's good at this, the small art of not being noticed, and opens her locker. Her scrubs are folded in thirds. Her stethoscope is coiled like a snake. And underneath everything, worn smooth against her collarbone through the fabric of her shirt, is a single dog tag on a broken chain. She touches it. Always touches it. A habit now, not a ritual, though the line between them disappeared years ago. Jennifer Chen, the night shift charge nurse, closes her locker 2 doors down. Morning, Laura. How's the back today? Better. It's not true. The morphine pump scar on her lower back aches from the overnight shift, the shrapnel injury to her L4 vertebra reminding her that some pain is permanent. But Jennifer doesn't need that answer. Jennifer needs to think her coworker is fine. Good. We've got 3 post-op kids in Bay 2. Vital stable, but that one, the 8-year-old with the cleft repair, is still drowsy from the anesthesia. Keep an eye on his O2 Saturday. It dipped to 91% around 4 a.m. Laura nods. She's already calculating interventions, already thinking 3 moves ahead. It's a habit that used to keep people alive in the Hindu Kush. Now it just keeps her employed in Raleigh, North Carolina. Jennifer leaves. The break room empties. Laura sits for exactly 4 minutes, long enough to drink half a cup of coffee, short enough that no one will ask if she's okay. She's not okay. She hasn't been okay since the IED fragmented her spine and ended her deployment. But okay is a luxury. Functional is what matters. Functional is what keeps the children alive. The pediatrics ward wakes up in increments. Parents arriving for morning visits. Breakfast carts rattling down hallways. A child crying somewhere, the sound high and thin and breaking at the edges. Laura moves from room to room with the efficiency of someone who has performed emergency thoracotomies with a combat knife. Nothing in pediatrics could surprise her anymore. She checks vitals. She adjusts 4 lines. She changes bandages with hands that don't shake, eyes that catalog blood flow and wound healing and the 1,000 small signs that separate life from its alternative. At 7:38 a.m., she starts a pediatric 4 on a 5-year-old with severe dehydration. The child has been stuck twice already. 2 other nurses tried. 2 other nurses failed. The vein is small, deep, moving. Most nurses would have called for the 5th attempt, protocol be damned, would have escalated to the attending physician. Laura finds it on the first try. The 22-gauge angiocath goes in smooth as water. The child stops crying. The 4 runs clear. How did you do that? Another nurse asks. Her name tag says Morgan. She's young, maybe 3 years in. She looks at Laura like she's seen magic. Practice, Laura says. It's not entirely a lie. Practice is what you call it when you've done something 1,000 times before. When your hands remember things your brain is trying to forget. By mid-morning, the rhythm of the ward has stabilized. Laura moves through her rounds with the quiet precision of someone conducting an invisible orchestra. She knows every patient's history, every medication, every potential complication. She knows which children will code if you're not watching, and which ones will surprise you by surviving anyway. This knowledge doesn't come from her nursing degree. It comes from a place she's carefully compartmentalized, locked away, hidden under scrubs and a fake smile. Dr. Richard Ashford arrives for rounds at 9:15 a.m. He moves through the ward like he owns it, which in some practical sense, he does. Chief of Surgery. Reputation built on risk management protocols so tight they've made Seattle General lawsuit-proof for 7 consecutive years. His white coat is pristine. His shoes are polished to a military shine, though of course he's never served. His presence makes the air pressure change, the way a storm changes it before the rain. Laura is updating a chart when he walks past. She straightens slightly, a small automatic gesture of deference. He nods without looking at her, already focused on the attending physician discussing a post-op case. This is normal. This is how it works. Laura is the sort of person doctors acknowledge the way they acknowledge furniture, necessary, functional, invisible. The day moves forward. Lunch happens. A child is discharged. Another is admitted with a fever they can't source. Laura works. She works the way she always works, which is completely. Every task is performed with the precision of someone for whom incomplete work equals death. In pediatrics, most incomplete work just equals a frightened parent and a lengthened stay. But muscle memory doesn't distinguish between stakes. Muscle memory just executes. At 4:33 p.m., the ER call bell chimes, the one that connects to the nurse's station, the one that means incoming trauma. Laura is running labs when she hears it. She doesn't react. She finishes entering the data. She logs out of the system. She sets down her pen. Then she moves toward the stairwell like everyone else, because when the ER is in motion, the whole hospital tilts toward it. By the time she reaches the trauma floor, the intake team is already moving. Emergency department is a controlled chaos, the kind that only looks controlled to people who understand the choreography. A gurney is being wheeled toward Trauma Bay 3. The patient is a man in his 40s, agitated, his arms moving in sharp jerks. His face is twisted with something beyond pain, there's fear in it, and confusion, and the particular kind of trauma that comes from being unable to communicate. Laura stops in the doorway. The world doesn't actually stop moving, but it feels like it does. It feels like time has become something she can see through, like glass. She knows his face. Not intimately, they've never met, but she knows it the way you know faces from photographs, from stories told in a kitchen at night by a young man who needed to talk about the people who saved his life. Marcus Webb. 44 years old. Combat veteran. Deaf since birth, fluent in ASL, deployed 3 times to Helmand Province with the 75th Ranger Regiment, where he worked as a reconnaissance specialist despite and because of and in spite of his disability. And more importantly, Marcus Webb commanded her son's unit in Kandahar. Marcus Webb wrote the letter that came when everything fell apart. Marcus Webb kept her son alive through an ambush that killed 3 other soldiers. What's his status? A doctor asks. His name tag says Hartley. He's looking at the patient report, frowning. Patient arrived via ambulance, found combative at residence, presenting with severe abdominal pain and difficulty breathing, the paramedic is saying. Deaf, patient is deaf, vitals are all over the place, elevated heart rate, blood pressure 160/95, he's been agitated since pickup. Marcus is on the gurney now, and his hands are moving. He's signing. Signing frantically. Please. Help. Pain. More. Pain. His face is the face of someone who has been trying to communicate for hours and no one has understood him. Dr. Hartley steps back slightly. Does anyone know ASL? No one answers. There's a silence in the trauma bay, the kind of silence that happens when people realize they've already failed. Get him to imaging, Hartley says. We need to figure out what's actually wrong before we can. He can lip read, Laura says. It comes out quieter than she intended. If you face him. If you speak clearly. Hartley looks at her. He's already moving on, already thinking about protocols and procedures and the next task. You're pediatrics. I know. Then stay in pediatrics. He leaves. The trauma team follows. Marcus is wheeled away, still signing, still trying, and Laura is left standing in the doorway like she's rooted there. She can feel the weight of the dog tag against her chest. She can feel her own heartbeat in her fingertips. She can feel the 18 years of careful normalcy threatening to crack. But that wasn't the worst part. What happened next didn't just silence the room. It set everything in motion. 3 hours pass. Laura moves through the pediatrics ward like a ghost, checking vitals, administering medications, existing in the spaces between heartbeats. She doesn't go back down to the ER. She doesn't ask questions. She's good at not asking questions. She's good at compartmentalizing. At 7:14 p.m., during shift change, she finally allows herself to check the ER status board. Marcus Webb. Bay 3. Status, under evaluation. Attending, Dr. Richard Ashford. Of course it's Ashford. Of course. She pulls up the notes. The first evaluation says, patient uncooperative, difficulty establishing communication, recommend psychiatric evaluation and further observation. The note is signed by Dr. Marcus Hartley. Timestamp, for 51 p.m. The second evaluation, patient continues combative behavior, communication barriers prevent proper assessment, liability concerns regarding treatment protocol given patient's behavioral status. Recommend observation pending psychiatric clearance. This one is Dr. Susan Chen. Timestamp, 5:15 p.m. Laura's jaw tightens. She can feel it happening, the slow shift in her posture, the way her shoulders are drawing back and her chest is expanding slightly. Her voice is starting to change, too. She can hear it in her own thoughts, deeper now, more clipped. The voice that used to order people to move, to breathe, to live. She keeps reading. Dr. Pavel Antonov, communication impairment creates unacceptable risk for medical error. Dr. James Whitmore, patient behavioral risk exceeds our ability to manage safely. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, recommend transfer to psychiatric facility pending communication accommodation plan. 5 doctors. Then 6. Then 8. Then 12. By 7:49 p.m., there are 15 refusal notes in Marcus Webb's file. 15 attending physicians, all with legitimate-sounding reasons, all with the perfect language of risk management and liability and safety protocols. All of them wrong. Laura closes the chart. She stands up. She looks down at her hands. They are steady. They've always been steady. The shift ends at 8:16 p.m. She doesn't leave. The shift doesn't end at 8 o'clock. Not for Laura. She stands at the nurse's station in pediatrics, watching the monitors, watching the time, watching the emergency department doors through the glass partition where Marcus Webb is still thrashing against his restraints in exam room 4. 15 minutes ago, she'd watched the 15th doctor walk out. 15. She'd counted each one. 15 different white coats, 15 different moments of dismissal, 15 different ways of saying the same thing, liability, communication barrier, non-compliant patient, not our problem. The fluorescent lights hum their endless mechanical song above her head. She doesn't hear it anymore. After 12 years in the field, after holding tourniquets on femoral arteries while mortars fell, after the IED that shattered her alpha vertebra and ended her career, hospital fluorescence is just background noise. What isn't noise is the monitor in Bay 4. The one showing Webb's vitals trending wrong. O2 sat at 91. Respiratory rate climbing. His body is telling a story and nobody in this building is listening. Laura had been changing 4 fluid bags in room 302 when she'd heard Ashford's voice in the hallway, that precise, clipped tone that made other doctors straighten their spines. She'd listened to him dismiss the afternoon attending. His combativeness makes proper examination impossible. We're looking at a psychiatric hold. Get him out of our ER before he hurts someone. She'd set down the fluid bag. Her hands had moved to her sides, steady as they always were, but something hot had risen in her chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just recognition. The 1,000-yard stare. The panic of a man screaming in silence. She'd found Ashford in the corridor near the medication dispensary, pulling him aside where the security cameras didn't quite reach. Dr. Ashford, I can help him. I know American Sign Language. Combat trauma. I can? His eyes had flickered over her like she was a piece of equipment he was checking inventory on. You can what, Bennett? You can't speak for him. You can't examine him. You can't diagnose him. You're a pediatric nurse. Stay in your lane. He's becoming more agitated because no one can communicate with him. He's showing signs of respiratory distress. His O2 is dropping because he's panicking, not because. That's not your call to make. Ashford's voice had dropped, which made it worse somehow. Quiet voices carried more weight. The attending physician makes the call. Not the nursing staff. Not the pediatric nursing staff playing doctor. She'd taken one breath. One measured breath like she'd been taught in combat medicine courses. Center yourself. Control what you can control. Then let me translate for him. Let me help the doctors understand what he's actually saying when he signs. That's not overstepping. That's nursing. That's insubordination if I tell you it is. He'd turned away from her, ending the conversation the way some men did, not with an argument, but with dismissal. As if her words had already evaporated before they'd even reached his ears. She'd watched him walk to the ER. Then she'd followed. The next 2 hours had been a study in institutional apathy. 15 doctors. She could name them now if she had to. The orthopedic surgeon who'd spent for minutes in the room. The cardiologist pulled from cardiology to help assess. The hospitalist who'd sent in a colleague who'd sent in another colleague until the chain of command looked like a pyramid scheme. Each one would enter the room, see Marcus Webb, 6'2", muscled, visibly distressed, hands moving in frantic patterns, and decide in under 5 minutes that the problem was the patient, not the system failing the patient. Non-compliant, the 15th doctor had said. She'd heard it through the open door. She'd heard Webb's grunt of frustration. She'd heard the rattle of restraints. Recommend psychiatric evaluation. This patient needs sedation and observation, not emergency medicine. Laura had been standing at the nurse's station, gripping the counter so hard her fingernails left crescents in the laminate. Her badge read Bennett, RN, pediatrics, and her hands had been shaking. Not from fear. From the particular tremor that comes from watching injustice and being powerless to stop it. The morphine pump scar on her lower back had ached like it always did when the barometric pressure dropped, but that wasn't why her shoulders were tight. It was because she recognized the sound of abandonment. She'd heard it in Kandahar too. Different language. Same message, we're done with you. She'd approached Ashford when he'd emerged from the attending lounge, coffee cup in hand, his white coat pristine. Dr. Ashford, I can help him. I know what he needs. His smile had been the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. You know what he needs? Are you a doctor now, Florence? The nickname had landed exactly as he'd intended it to land, public, dismissive, the kind of thing you could repeat to other staff and they'd laugh because they didn't understand the weight it carried. Just a little ribbing. Just a nurse overstepping. Just someone who didn't know her place. 2 nurses at the station had looked up. Sarah, the young RN from the evening shift who'd gone to state championships in volleyball 3 years ago and now mostly just looked tired, had met Laura's eyes for half a second before looking away. That moment, that small moment of Sarah choosing not to help, had said more about Seattle General's culture than 1,000 HR mandates ever could. I know he kept my son alive in Kandahar. Laura's voice had been level. Not angry. Just stating a fact. That's what I know. Ashford's jaw had tightened. My office. Now, the supply closet wasn't technically an office, but Ashford seemed to prefer it for these conversations. Smaller. Fewer witnesses. The shelves held stacked boxes of gloves, surgical masks, gauze pads. The air smelled like bleach and cardboard. He'd closed the door behind her and the fluorescent panel above had flickered once. "You are being written up for insubordination," he'd said. His voice was controlled now, which made it worse than yelling. "You do not countermand physician orders. You do not insert yourself into cases above your competence level. You do not undermine the attending physician. Do you understand?" Laura had met his eyes. The morphine pump scar had suddenly felt very visible, even though it was covered by her scrubs. She'd thought about the 18-year-old Marine who died because a field medic had lacked authority to override a superior officer's orders. She'd thought about the 3 women she'd trained in Kandahar who didn't exist in any official records because their work didn't fit into any official categories. She'd thought about Marcus Webb, signed into and psychiatric hold, sedated into silence. "I understand you've let 15 doctors walk away from a veteran in crisis," she'd said. Ashford's expression hadn't changed. He'd set his coffee cup on a box of 4x4 gauze. "Then you understand nothing about how hospitals survive. Understand this, you do not speak about this conversation to anyone. You do not discuss your concerns about this case with other staff. You do not approach Dr. Webb again. Do we have clarity?" Perfect clarity. He'd opened the door and she'd walked out into the hallway where the fluorescent lights were still humming and nothing had changed except everything. The parking lot was half full at 7 p.m. when her shift ended. The rain was coming in from the northwest, moving slow across Raleigh's evening sky like it wasn't sure if it actually wanted to fall. She'd been walking to her car when she'd heard his voice. "Bennett. Effective immediately, you're removed from charge nurse duties." Ashford was standing near the staff entrance with 6 colleagues, the evening shift supervisors, 2 cardiologists, a resident, and someone from hospital administration she recognized but had never spoken to. His voice carried across the parking lot like a news broadcast. Like he wanted everyone to hear. "You'll be reassigned to overnight janitorial support. Perhaps cleaning bedpans will teach you about hierarchy." The other nurses had stared at the ground. Sarah had looked like someone had physically struck her, her mouth opening and closing with nothing coming out. The administrator had pulled out her phone. Ashford hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. Quiet cruelty always carries farther than loud anger. Laura had stopped walking. One tear had escaped. Just one. It had tracked down her cheek before she'd wiped it away with the back of her hand, not breaking eye contact with Ashford. The tear wasn't fear. The tremor in her chest wasn't collapse. It was restraint. It was the carefully maintained control of someone who'd been trained to kill with her bare hands but had chosen instead to heal. The tears, when they came, were just the price of holding it in. 15 doctors saw a problem, she'd said. Her voice had been steady. Quiet. The kind of quiet that makes people lean in. "I see the man who kept my son alive in Kandahar." She turned and walked to her car with her limp more pronounced from the 12-hour shift, from standing, from the weight of being invisible while everyone watched. She'd sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, the single dog tag on its broken chain cold against her chest where it always rested. The tag bore her own name, her own service number. Not her late husband's. That was the lie she'd kept so carefully that she'd almost believed it herself, that the weight around her neck belonged to someone else, someone already gone, someone she'd failed to save from cancer while she was overseas. Her son was deployed. She couldn't call him. Couldn't let him worry about this, couldn't pull him out of focus, couldn't make him choose between a career and a mother falling apart. Instead she'd driven home through the rain, the wipers moving in their rhythm like a metronome, and she'd thought about Kandahar, about the field hospital with its triage protocol and its shortage of supplies and its profound abundance of urgency. She'd thought about Marcus Webb's eyes when she'd looked at him from the nurse's station. She'd thought about the 15 doctors who'd walked away. The emergency department had that particular 1:53 a.m. quality, the fluorescent lights humming their monotonous dirge, the monitors beeping in overlapping rhythms like a broken orchestra, the kind of silence that only exists when exhaustion has ground everyone down to the bare mechanics of staying alive. Laura had been reassigned to janitorial support exactly 12 hours earlier, which meant she was mopping the third-floor corridors when the alert came through: admission to Bay 6, respiratory distress, non-communicative patient. She didn't stop mopping. She didn't look up. She knew who it was before the announcement finished crackling through the intercom. Marcus Webb's eyes were closed when she reached the doorway. His lips carried that particular shade of cyanosis, not quite purple, but the grey-blue of someone whose oxygen was dropping in real time. His jugular veins bulged like cords beneath his skin, distended and pulsing with the effort of a body trying to breathe against collapsed pressure. The monitor showed 78% O2 sat and dropping. The ventilator was being prepped at bedside, but there was something else here, something that screamed into Laura's bones with the kind of certainty that only comes from having diagnosed it 50 times before in a field hospital under mortar fire. Tension pneumothorax. The air wasn't just in his lung, it was in his pleural space, building pressure, collapsing his lung like a fist crushing paper. Every breath was making it worse. Every minute they waited was a minute closer to cardiac arrest. The staff nurse at the bedside was named Sarah, probably fresh out of her residency, and she was watching the monitor with the particular expression of someone who knows something is very wrong and has no idea what to do about it. 2 residents stood near the door, conferencing quietly. The ER attending wasn't visible yet. Laura didn't think. She moved. She approached the bedside with the kind of approach that doesn't announce itself, no rushing, no drama, just the fluid forward motion of someone who knows the exact sequence of what comes next. Marcus's eyes opened when he sensed her presence. Recognition flickered first. Then fear. Then something else. She signed to him, her hand steady and precise: "Trust me." Like Helmand. His eyes widened. Not with confusion, with understanding. With the knowledge that the person standing at his bedside had been there before. Had done this before. Had done this under worse conditions than the climate-controlled bay of Seattle General in Raleigh. "We need to get an attending before we move him," Sarah said, her voice carrying the tremor of protocol following under uncertainty. "Chest imaging to confirm." "No time," Laura said. She was already moving, positioning him supine, her fingers finding the space between his ribs with the kind of certainty that belongs only to hands that have done this in darkness and sandstorms. Second intercostal space. Midclavicular line. The anatomy was the same whether you were in a field hospital with a combat knife or in a trauma bay with proper equipment. Her fingers palpated. Counted. Found the landmark that lived in her muscle memory like a scar. "Laura, if you do this without an order," Sarah's voice was small, caught between protocol and the reality of a patient deteriorating in front of them. "Then I do this without an order." Her hands didn't shake. The tremor that civilians experience before invasive procedures, the hesitation, the flutter of self-doubt, belonged to people who hadn't already made peace with breaking regulations to save someone's life. Laura had made that peace in Helmand Province. It was old ground now. She'd assembled the needle decompression kit in the seconds it took Sarah to step back. 14-gauge angiocath, the needle straight and true. She positioned it at the angle that lived in her bones, the angle she'd practiced 10,000 times, the angle she'd executed in vehicle bays and triage tents and the back of a burning Humvee. The needle advanced between the ribs with the slightest resistance. There was that moment, that specific moment, where the needle enters the pleural space, and then the hiss of air escaping. Immediate. Unmistakable. The sound of pressure releasing, of a body stopping its descent into arrest. Marcus's chest wall visibly decompressed, the bulging veins smoothing as the pressure inside his thorax normalized. His breathing eased. The monitor began its climb: 81%, 85%, 89%, 92%. His color returned like someone flipping a switch. The gray receded. Real pink bloomed in his cheeks. He looked at her, his eyes sharp and focused now, and signed with the precision of a soldier reporting in Nightingale 6. She shook her head slightly, brought a finger to her lips. The sign for silence. For discretion. For understanding. He nodded, and that nod contained everything: recognition of rank, recognition of shared experience, the knowledge that the woman standing at his bedside had just saved his life using skills that official protocol said she shouldn't possess. Sarah exhaled. A sound like relief that hadn't known it was holding its breath. How did you know how to? The ICU doors exploded open. Dr. Ashford didn't stride so much as materialize, his presence arriving before his body had fully crossed the threshold. His coat was still buttoned. His tie was still perfect. His face was the color of someone whose carefully constructed hierarchy had just been violated by a janitorial staff member performing field medicine without consultation or permission. Behind him, 2 security guards flanked like bookends on a shelf. He saw the decompression needle. He saw Laura standing at the bedside. He saw the vital signs climbing steadily on the monitor. What the hell did you do? His voice was quiet. Laura had learned something important about dangerous men over the years: the truly dangerous ones didn't need to raise their volume. Volume was for men who were uncertain. Ashford sounded like he was discussing the weather. She just saved his life, Sarah said. Her voice wobbled slightly. His O2 was dropping fast. She recognized. I'm not asking you. He pulled his phone from his pocket. The motion was smooth. Practiced. This wasn't the first time he'd done this: called for removal, called for termination, called for someone to disappear from his institution. He dialed even as he was speaking, his eyes locked on Laura's face. You performed an unauthorized invasive procedure. You're not even assigned to this floor. You're janitorially classified. You're terminated effective immediately. He brought the phone to his ear. Yes, I need security at Bay 6. This staff member is being escorted off the property. Yes. Now. The guards approached. Laura stood still. Not frozen, still. The difference was subtle but important. Frozen meant fear. Still meant control. Speak with your attorney if you feel this is unjust, Ashford continued, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone reciting something he'd done before, a script so practiced it had worn grooves into his brain. Your access badges are revoked. Your employment file is flagged for patient endangerment. We will be pursuing civil liability recovery for any damages to this institution's reputation or insurance status. Laura looked at Marcus Webb one last time. His eyes were clear. His chest was moving with the steady rhythm of someone whose body had stopped fighting gravity. She signed to him, "Rest easy, soldier." He signed back, "Thank you, Major." The security guards didn't touch her. They just positioned themselves on either side and walked her through the ICU, past the nurses' station where a dozen staff members watched in the peculiar silence that falls when institutional power and human decency collide. She felt their eyes on her back: Sarah, the residents, the nurses who'd whispered about the woman who'd been demoted to cleaning floors. They were watching someone walk toward a door that was about to close. The elevator ride took 97 seconds. She counted. The descent gave her time to feel the implication settling into her chest, the termination, the flagged file, that patient endangerment that would follow her from hospital to hospital like a permanent stain. The security guard at the door confiscated her badge with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd done this before. She heard Ashford's voice in the distance, already on his phone, already calling the board. The rain in the parking lot was coming down in sheets. The kind of rain that doesn't ask permission, doesn't wait for acceptance. It hammered the asphalt with the rhythm of applause for a show nobody wanted to see. Laura walked to her car with her hands at her sides, her back straight, her face delivering exactly nothing to the security guards who watched from the entrance. She sat in the driver's seat for 14 minutes without turning the key. Just Saturday. Just breathed. Just felt the weight of the morphine pump scar on her lower back where the shrapnel had embedded itself 7 years ago, a reminder of the body's capacity to carry damage while continuing forward. She thought about Marcus Webb's eyes when they'd locked on her face. She thought about the 15 doctors who'd walked away from him. She thought about the single dog tag on a broken chain that hung beneath her scrubs, the one with her own name and service number. Nightingale 6. That call sign didn't belong to her anymore. It had belonged to the major, to the woman who'd held soldiers together in sandstorms, who'd made life-and-death decisions under fire, who'd known exactly what to do when the world was collapsing. Now it belonged to a woman mopping floors at 1:53 a.m., watching from the shadows. But that woman had just saved Marcus Webb's life using skills that no one was supposed to know she possessed. And in exactly 18 hours, she would find out that someone had been watching. That someone had been documenting. That someone had already made phone calls to numbers that didn't appear in any civilian directory. The rain continued. The parking lot continued. And in Bay 6, Marcus Webb continued breathing, his lungs full, his heart steady, alive because a nurse in scrubs had remembered exactly who she used to be. The parking lot continued. And in Bay 6, Marcus Webb continued breathing, his lungs full, his heart steady, alive because a nurse in scrubs had remembered exactly who she used to be. Dr. Ashford arrived at the nurse's station at 2:17 a.m., his face the color of old concrete. Laura was still at Marcus's bedside, monitoring his O2 saturation climbing steadily, 88 now, then 91, then 92, the numbers climbing like a soldier coming back to consciousness. She didn't look up when Ashford entered the bay. She didn't need to. She could feel the air pressure change when he moved, the way apex predators sense a shift in the wind before the storm arrives. Step away from that patient. Not a request. A command delivered in a voice that had never been questioned in an operating room. Laura's hands continued their work. Pulse check on the radial artery. Steady. Strong. The kind of steady that came from a chest cavity full of functioning lung tissue instead of collapsed membrane and trapped air. I said step away. She turned then. Not quickly. Not defensively. The way someone turns when they've already made their decision and nothing in the universe will change it. Her eyes met his for exactly 2 seconds. That was all it took. Security. Ashford spoke into his radio without breaking eye contact with her. Code 72 to ICU Bay 6. I need a staff member removed from the building immediately. The radio crackled. Copy that, Doctor. 2 minutes. Laura removed her gloves with the deliberate care of someone removing the final piece of armor. The latex snapped like gunshots in the sudden silence. She placed them in the biohazard bin and stepped back from the monitor, but she didn't leave the room. She sat down in the plastic chair beside Marcus's bed, her hands folded in her lap, her spine straight. Ashford's jaw clenched. You performed an unauthorized procedure on a patient without attending physician approval. He was dying. You don't have the authority to make that decision. Nobody was going to. Laura's voice was steady as a surgical laser. 15 doctors saw a liability. I saw a man who needed to breathe. The 2 security officers appeared in the doorway, young, uncertain, clearly trained for drunk patients and angry visitors, not for whatever this was. Ashford pointed. Remove her. Escort her out of the building. Now. Laura stood. She didn't resist. She didn't argue. She simply stood and walked toward the door with the kind of composure that made the security officers step aside without touching her. As she passed Ashford, she spoke quietly enough that only he could hear. His stable. His wife is in the waiting room. His name is Marcus Webb. Ashford's face went rigid. At 2:34 a.m., from his office on the 3rd floor, Ashford made 3 calls. The first was to James Sterling, the board chairman, a man who owed Ashford favors after he'd covered up a medication error that could have ended Sterling's nephew's nursing career. The second was to Catherine Hayes, a board member whose daughter had married Ashford's former roommate. The third was to Marcus Conrad, the hospital's legal counsel, a man who understood that institutions survived by protecting their own and destroying threats before threats could organize. I need termination paperwork prepared, Ashford said to each of them. Patient endangerment. Unauthorized medical procedures. Gross insubordination. I want her gone before 8 a.m. None of them asked questions. At 3:06 a.m., Ashford was in the administrative office with Karen from HR. He personally opened Laura's personnel file and flagged it. Patient endangerment. Unauthorized procedure. Reckless disregard for hospital protocol. He had IT delete her from the scheduling system entirely, not suspended, not reassigned, deleted. Her access badge was flagged in the database. Her state nursing credentials would be reported to the licensing board by dawn. Each action was a calculation. Each one designed to create a paper trail that would make her unemployable in any medical institution within 300 miles. By 3:11 a.m., it was done. Laura Bennett, the quiet nurse from pediatrics, had been erased from Seattle General Systems with the precision of a surgical scalpel. Laura drove through Raleigh at 3:56 a.m., the streets empty, the traffic lights changing colors for no one. Her hands gripped the steering wheel at 10:02, the way she'd been taught, the way she'd held a weapon once, the way she'd held soldiers' hands. The adrenaline was draining now, leaving something hollow behind. Something that felt like knowing exactly how badly you've destroyed everything you built. She passed the exit to her apartment building. Kept driving. She passed the 24-hour diner where Sarah, the night nurse, always grabbed coffee on her break. Kept driving. She passed the church where her late husband David's memorial service had been held, his ashes scattered, his absence a weight that never got lighter. Kept driving. The rain started somewhere around mile 17, light at first, then steady, the kind of rain that felt like the sky was crying on your behalf because you'd forgotten how. Greenwood Cemetery's gates were open to no one in particular and everyone in general. Laura's car rolled through at 5:23 a.m., the headlights cutting through the darkness like a scalpel through skin. She parked near the maintenance entrance and walked, her limp more pronounced than usual, the pain in her lower back radiating in waves. The morphine pump scar tissue was always worse when she was tired, when her guard was down, when the body remembered trauma that the mind was trying to forget. The rain soaked through her scrubs in seconds. She didn't try to shield herself. She just walked, row after row, until she found the stone marked with his name in letters that had started to blur with moss and time. David Bennett. 1978 to 2014, beloved husband. She knelt in the wet grass. The rain ran down her face, mixing with tears she didn't remember starting to shed. The stone was cold under her palm, covered in algae and years. I failed again, she whispered to the granite that couldn't answer. Just like the day I couldn't save you. The rain drummed on her shoulders like a sniper's drum. I was overseas when the cancer took you. I was in Helmand Province when you needed me, and I'm here now but I still can't, I can't do this right. I can't protect anyone. I can't even protect myself from making the same mistakes. She touched the dog tag around her neck, the chain broken, the metal slick with rain. Her own name was engraved there, the letters worn smooth from 17 years of touching, of remembering, of refusing to forget. My Eld Bennett. Special Forces. Nightingale 6. They took my badge tonight. Took my position. Ashford's got board connections, he'll make sure I never work in a hospital again. Maybe he's right. Maybe I don't belong here. Thunder rolled across the cemetery like artillery, distant and relentless. I thought I could leave it behind. The war. The rank. All of it. Build something new in the quiet. But it follows me everywhere. You told me it would, and I didn't listen. I thought if I just kept my head down, worked night shifts, stayed out of the way, the uniform would finally come off for good. Her hands were shaking now. Not from cold. From the weight of understanding that some parts of you don't come home, even when the body does. I'm sorry, David. I'm sorry I wasn't here. And I'm sorry I couldn't save him tonight without destroying everything else. The dawn was breaking grey and hesitant over Raleigh. Laura stood slowly, her legs stiff, her back screaming, and turned away from the grave. She walked toward her car without looking back, because looking back was a luxury soldiers didn't have, and she'd never quite stopped being a soldier, no matter how many scrubs she wore or how many nights she spent in a pediatric unit watching children breathe easier. Back at Seattle General, the sun rose over the parking lot at 6:56 a.m., and Dr. Ashford arrived before most of the day's shift, carrying a briefcase that contained the architecture of a woman's destruction. He went directly to HR, directly to Karen's desk, and placed the termination paperwork in front of her with the satisfaction of someone who understood power and how to use it. Patient endangerment, he said. Unauthorized medical procedures. Insubordination. I want this processed by 7 a.m. and her final check deposited by noon. Karen nodded. She didn't ask questions. Nobody asked questions about Ashford. At 6:53 a.m., he called 3 board members and briefed them, his voice carrying the weight of institutional protection, the kind of weight that moved money and shut down investigations. By 7:15 a.m., IT had deleted Laura's access from every system. By 7:27 a.m., he was standing in the ICU briefing the morning shift, explaining to the assembled residents and nurses that a rogue staff member performed an unauthorized procedure that could have resulted in patient death or serious harm. He didn't mention that Marcus Webb was awake. That Marcus Webb was asking for the nurse who'd saved his life. That Marcus Webb's oxygen saturation was steady at 96% and climbing. Sarah approached him quietly at 7:45 a.m., her face pale, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Ashford, our patient in Bay 6, Lieutenant Colonel Webb, is asking for the nurse who assisted him during the emergency. He's insistent. Ashford's smile was a blade concealed in expensive fabric. That nurse no longer works here. If he asks again, note it as continued agitation. Increase his sedation to 4 milligrams lorazepam. We can't have an agitated patient. Sarah's face went white. She nodded and walked away, her hand shaking, and that's when everything changed. At 0800 hours, the rotor wash shook Seattle General like thunder rolling across Helmand Province. Hums pulled into the circular drive, their tires cutting wet pavement as hospital staff froze mid-stride. Then the Black Hawk came down, blades hammering the parking lot, gravel exploding outward in a spiral, the sound of rotors like a war drum heard from inside a cave. The aircraft skids touched asphalt. Doors opened. Combat boots touched ground. A full-bird colonel walked through the ER entrance with the kind of presence that made air pressure change. His dress blues were immaculate. His ribbons told stories, rows of them, stories in color and thread. He crossed the lobby and found Dr. Richard Ashford standing by the information desk, his face already pale. "I'm looking for Major Laura Bennett," the colonel said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. By her call sign. Nightingale 6. Ashford's mouth opened. No words came out. A door to the left swung open. A man in army dress uniform stepped through, tall, shoulders squared, 34 years old with his father's jawline and his mother's steady eyes. Captain James Bennett, United States Army, 3rd Battalion 5th Marines. Dark Horse Company. He stood directly in front of Dr. Ashford. When he spoke, his voice was the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. "That's Major Bennett to you, sir. The woman you fired saved my commanding officer's life." James turned to the colonel. "Sir, she's here. She doesn't know any of this is happening." The head nurse, Sarah, the one who'd trembled reading personnel files in the break room, stood frozen with a blue folder in her hands. Laura's unredacted service file. Her hands were shaking. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. When words came, they were barely audible. 2 silver stars, she whispered. A distinguished service cross. She's had her medical license since 2008. Prior service medical officer. Trauma surgeon qualified. The file says she trained SEAL medics. How did we not? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. How did we not know? The SEAL team leader entered behind James, a man with the kind of scars you don't ask about and the kind of eyes that had seen things that broke normal people. He walked to the center of the lobby where Ashford stood, and he began to speak. Each word was a sentence. Each sentence was a medal hanging in the air. Bronze Star with Valor. Saved 12 soldiers during a field hospital mortar attack in Sanjan Valley, Helmand Province, 2009. He paused. A breath. A swallow. Silver Star. Performed a combat thoracotomy with field equipment under direct fire. That soldier is alive because she didn't hesitate. Another pause. The lobby was silent except for the fluorescent lights humming their electric hymn. Second Silver Star. Led a 23-person casualty extraction after an IED strike. Everyone made it back. His voice tightened. Purple Heart. Shrapnel to her L for vertebra. She kept working. Morphine pump. She kept working. He stepped closer to Ashford. You fired the only person in this hospital capable of saving lives like that. You fired her because she wouldn't let a deaf man die on your watch. Ashford's face had gone the color of old concrete. He turned and walked away without speaking, his pace increasing, his breathing visible from across the lobby. By 10 a.m., he was in his office with his door locked. By 11 a.m., his PR consultant was on a conference call. By noon, he was sitting in a television studio under studio lights that made him look like a corpse. WCNC Charlotte's anchor introduced him with perfect professional distance. Dr. Richard Ashford, Chief of Surgery at Seattle General, responding to reports that the hospital fired a decorated veteran. She leaned forward. Doctor, can you walk us through what happened? Ashford's voice had the tight control of a man holding his face together with fingernails. We respect military service. Deeply. But this narrative is misleading. Laura Bennett violated clear hospital protocols. She performed an unauthorized procedure without consulting attending physicians. In a medical facility, chains of command exist for patient safety. She endangered a vulnerable patient by circumventing proper channels. But the patient survived, the anchor said. The patient survived despite her recklessness, not because of it. We have qualified physicians for emergencies. His hands gripped the armrest. This is a publicity stunt designed to discredit a hospital that upheld professional standards. The studio phone rang. The anchor's eyes shifted, someone was feeding her information through her earpiece. She touched her ear, and her expression changed. Not shock. Something deeper. Authority arriving. We have a caller, she said. General Marcus Hammond, United States Special Operations Command. The voice that came through the studio speakers was like a tank idling in a garage, power at rest, potential for destruction held barely in check. Good afternoon. I'm looking at Dr. Ashford's hospital biography right now. It states he served as a Navy medical officer from 1995 to 2000, with deployment to the Persian Gulf. A pause. Ashford's face went grey. That's a fabrication. Public records show no military service. No deployment. You purchased a Navy officer's ring from a pawn shop in 2003. You've been wearing a lie for 20 years. Ashford tried to speak. His voice cracked. I never claimed. Your hospital biography claims it. 2 million people are reading it right now. You lied about military service while sitting in judgment of the only decorated officer in that room. Major Bennett has 2 silver stars. You have a costume jewelry ring and a fabricated resume. The general's voice didn't change volume. It didn't need to. She saved 43 lives in combat. You tried to erase her to protect your ego. You failed. The interview ended. Ashford sat frozen while the anchor removed her microphone. By 2 p.m., the video had 6 million views. By 4 p.m., the hospital board demanded his resignation. By 6 p.m., the state medical board opened an ethics investigation. 6 months later, the parking lot at Seattle General looked exactly the same. The rain still fell. The ambulances still arrived. But the narrative had shifted. Truth moves slower than lies, but it moves like gravity, inevitable, unstoppable, crushing everything in its path. Laura Bennett walked through the bright corridors of the new VA clinic in downtown Raleigh, her name embroidered on navy blue scrubs, Laura Bennett, RN, My USA, RET. The limp was barely noticeable now after physical therapy. She'd helped design this place, consulted on trauma protocols, trained staff in combat-specific PTSD recognition, made sure every veteran who walked through the doors knew they wouldn't be refused. Her office was small, windowed, overlooking a courtyard where veterans sat in the sun. On the wall behind her desk hung the single dog tag on its broken chain, displayed in a shadow box with brass nameplate, Bennett, LM, My USA. Beside it hung a photograph, Marcus Webb walking out of Seattle General under his own power, 6 days after admission, signing "Thank you" with his hands. His smile was the smile of a man given back his life. Sarah, the young nurse from Seattle General, poked her head through the office door. "Major Bennett? Your 2 o'clock is here." Laura looked up from her notes and smiled. "How many times do I have to tell you, it's just Laura now?" "Old habits, Major." Sarah grinned and closed the door. That evening, Laura drove past the South Point Mall. Through the window of the food court, she saw a folding table near the entrance. A banner hung above it, Supplemental Insurance Solutions. Behind that table sat Dr. Richard Ashford in a rumpled suit, his hair grayer, speaking to an elderly couple who looked deeply skeptical. He glanced up as she passed. Their eyes met for exactly 1 second. She felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just the weight of truth settling into place. She drove to the cemetery at dusk. The grass was dry. She knelt at David's grave, her husband, the man who'd told her before he died that she'd save the one she could reach and that would be enough. "I didn't fail," she told the stone. "Marcus Webb is walking." Sarah found her courage. "And I found my way forward." She touched the place where the dog tag used to rest against her chest, hidden all those years. "I think you'd be proud. Heroes walk among us. Sometimes in scrub saving lives in the dark." If you found yourself in Laura's position, knowing something the institution denied, would you have risked everything? Subscribe and comment below. This story matters. These stories matter. Because somewhere right now, someone is being refused. Someone is being denied. And somewhere, there's a Laura Bennett who has to decide if her integrity matters more than her career. Let us know what you would have done.